The last thing 14 British sailors ever saw was a man walking toward them through his own cannon smoke. Slow, deliberate, like he had nowhere else to be. He had fuses burning in his beard, actual fuses, the kind you light to fire cannons, braided into the thick black hair on his face, lit at both ends, coiling sulfur smoke up past his eyes and across his cheekbones. The smell of gunpowder mixed with blood and salt water. His coat was black, his belt carried 6 pistols, loaded, and his eyes, by every surviving account from the men who witnessed this and actually lived, were completely calm. He looked like the devil had decided to take a morning stroll across the Atlantic Ocean. His name was Edward Teach, but nobody called him that. Nobody had called him that for years. They called him Blackbeard, and here is the thing that gets missed every single time someone tells this story. The beard, the fuses, the smoke pouring off his face during a boarding action. None of it was an accident. None of it was spontaneous. This man sat down and engineered himself as a weapon of psychological terror before he ever fired a single shot at anyone. He understood something about fear that most military commanders of his era were still struggling to learn. If your enemy breaks before the fight starts, you don't have to fight. The battle is over before the first cannon fires, and if you never really have to fight, you survive, you keep operating, you keep taking ships. This was not madness. This was a business model. But that gets ahead of the story. Because on the morning of November 22nd, 1718, Blackbeard was anchored near Ocracoke Inlet on the coast of North Carolina, and Lieutenant Robert Maynard of the Royal Navy had just found him. Maynard had been hunting him for weeks. He had orders from the governor of Virginia, specific, written orders, to bring back Blackbeard's head, not his surrender. His head. What Maynard didn't know, and what nobody had thought to tell him, was that Blackbeard had spent the entire previous night drinking rum with his crew. And somewhere in the middle of that night, surrounded by the men who had followed him across 2 years and 2 oceans, Edward Teach had told anyone willing to listen that he was ready to die. Hold those 2 threads, the fuses in the beard, and the last night before the battle. Both of them explain something about this man that 300 years of stories have never quite gotten right. This video is not going to do the thing most retellings do with Blackbeard. It's not going to tell you he was a romantic rebel, a proto-revolutionary, a misunderstood freedom fighter pushing back against colonial oppression. That version of the story exists. It sells merchandise. It is, for the most part, wishful thinking applied to a man who robbed merchant ships for a living. It's also not going to tell you he was simply a violent brute who got lucky for a couple of years until someone stopped him. That version is even less accurate and considerably more boring. What this is going to do is show you the actual man, the specific decisions he made, and the specific logic behind them. The thing he built in less than 2 years that had the entire Atlantic seaboard of the British colonies operating in a state of genuine, documented panic. The moment where his brilliance and his self-destruction became the exact same decision. And the battle at Ocracoke Inlet, which lasted less than 15 minutes and produced casualties that nobody who was there ever stopped talking about. By the end of this, you will understand why Blackbeard is not famous because he was the most successful pirate. He wasn't. He is famous because he was the most intentional. And there is a difference between those 2 things that matters more than any treasure he ever took. Start with the world he came from. Edward Teach, sometimes spelled Fatch because standardized spelling was considered a luxury in the 1680s, was most likely born in Bristol, England, somewhere around 1680. The historical records are thin and inconsistent, which was common for men of his social class in that era. Poor boys from Bristol port towns did not generate extensive documentation. What they generated was labor. They went to sea young because the sea was where the work was, and work was the only alternative to slow starvation in a city that didn't particularly care whether they lived or died. During Queen Anne's War, which ran from 1702 to 1713, Teach almost certainly served as a privateer A privateer was, in practical terms, a legal pirate. You received a letter of marque from the Crown authorizing you to attack enemy ships, French, Spanish, whoever England happened to be fighting that decade, and you kept a portion of whatever you took. The Crown got plausible deniability. The privateers got rich, or dead depending largely on luck and skill. Teach evidently developed both. Then the war ended in 1713, and here is the thing about privateers when the fighting stops. They still have the ship, the weapons, the crew, the skills, and the complete absence of any other marketable employment. The British government thanked them for 11 years of service and suggested they find honest work. Some tried. Most didn't last. The adjustment from licensed violence back to peacetime commerce was not a transition that everyone could make, especially when honest work paid almost nothing and the skills you had were specifically calibrated for a different kind of career. By 1716, Teach was in the Caribbean, working as a junior crew member under a pirate captain named Benjamin Hornigold. Hornigold was experienced, methodical, and perceptive. He saw something in Teach that was worth developing. Within a short period, he gave Teach command of a small captured sloop. This was the apprenticeship. This was where Teach learned the operational side of what would become his career: how to run down a merchant vessel, how to read a captain's willingness to fight, how to manage a crew that was always one bad day away from mutiny or desertion. In late 1717, they took a French slave ship called La Concorde. She was a substantial vessel, around 400 tons, well-armed, capable of carrying significant crew and cargo. Hornigold gave her to Teach as a gift, which tells you something about what Hornigold thought of his protégé's potential. Teach renamed her Queen Anne's Revenge, fitted her with 40 cannons, and set about becoming the thing that still has a name today. The context around him was significant. Historians call this period, roughly 1715 to 1726, the golden age of piracy. The Caribbean and the American colonial coast were thick with merchant shipping. The Royal Navy, exhausted and underfunded after decades of European war, was stretched too thin to patrol effectively. Colonial governors ranged from actively corrupt to merely underfunded to completely ineffective. The waters between Nassau and the Carolinas were, for a brief window of about 10 years, operating in a genuine power vacuum. Nobody was really in charge. Nobody had the resources to be in charge. Blackbeard walked into that vacuum, and then he made it larger. The beard came before everything else. Before the fuses, before the fleet, before the 40 cannons and the hundreds of crew members. There was the physical presentation. Long, thick, black beard braided into tails tied with ribbons. An intentional silhouette that was unmistakable at distance across open water. Every pirate of that era had some kind of visual element meant to intimidate. Flags, mostly. Skull and crossbones imagery. A few had personal affectations that became associated with their name. Blackbeard was doing something more sophisticated than any of them. He was constructing a brand in an era that didn't have that word. The merchant shipping world of 1717 ran on rumors. News traveled at the speed of a ship, which meant news arrived in ports carried by sailors who had survived encounters and were going to describe those encounters to every other sailor in the tavern that night. The question was always what stuck. Vague descriptions of generic pirates with swords blurred together after a few retellings. But a man with a massive black beard who walked through cannon smoke with fire literally burning from his face, surrounded by sulfur and moving like the fight was already over before it started. That image didn't blur. That image got sharper with every retelling. That image arrived in ports before Blackbeard's ship did, so that by the time the merchant captain on the water saw Queen Anne's Revenge coming up alongside him, he already knew the story. He had already made a decision, which was exactly the point. His first major campaign ran through the Caribbean in late 1717 and into early 1718. He took at least a dozen ships in those months. The tactic was consistent and efficient. Queen Anne's Revenge was large and visibly armed. Coming alongside a merchant vessel in those waters, at that time, With that flag, most captains surrendered without a shot fired. The black flag meant a clear and simple offer: surrender now and live, resist, and the alternative was immediate and unpleasant. Most captains were merchants, not fighters. They had cargo, they had crew they were responsible for, and they had no good reason to die for their employer's profit margin. Most ships surrendered. This matters enormously because it cuts against the popular image of Blackbeard as a sadist. His actual operational strategy depended on not killing people, not primarily out of mercy, though accounts suggest he treated surrendered crews reasonably well by the standards of the era, but out of clear-eyed business logic. Dead sailors produced a specific kind of news. The pirate murdered everyone. Expect no quarter. Fight to the last. That news made captains fight back. Fighting captains cost you men, cost you ammunition, damaged your ship, and created complications. Blackbeard needed captains to believe that surrender was safe and profitable. He kept that end of the bargain because keeping it was rational. The fuses in the beard were the theatrical complement to this logic. Contemporary accounts describe the practice in detail. Before a boarding action, Teach would light the slow-burning hemp cords, tuck them under the brim of his hat, or braid them into his beard, and let the sulfur smoke curl around his face throughout the engagement. John Johnson, who wrote one of the earliest biographical accounts of Blackbeard, described the effect as producing a figure that imagination cannot form an idea of a fury from hell to look more frightful. That's a contemporary description from someone who actually spoke to witnesses. The man being described is consciously creating a specific visual effect at a specific moment for a specific purpose. Fear short-circuits rational calculation. A merchant captain facing a normal pirate might weigh his options: fight, surrender, run. A merchant captain who watches a demon walk out of cannon smoke wreathed in fire has already stopped calculating. He has gone somewhere more primal. And from that primal place, surrender looks considerably more attractive than whatever that thing across the deck is. By early 1718, Blackbeard was operating with a fleet of several vessels and a combined crew that at its peak reached somewhere around 300 men. He was the most discussed, most feared pirate on the Atlantic. He had moved from the Caribbean up along the American colonial coast, and merchant traffic in those waters was moving differently, changing routes, bunching together, moving faster, doing exactly what merchant traffic does when it is afraid. Then he did something that nobody anticipated. In May 1718, Blackbeard sailed into the mouth of Charleston Harbor and stopped every ship entering or leaving. The whole port, Charleston, South Carolina, one of the most important and wealthy ports in the British colonial system. He blockaded it with Queen Anne's Revenge and several accompanying vessels and turned away or seized every ship that tried to pass. He held several prominent Charleston citizens as hostages aboard his ship. The governor of South Carolina, the council, the merchants, the entire established power structure of one of the Crown's most significant colonial ports sat ashore and could do nothing. Blackbeard sent a message to the governor explaining his terms. He wanted medicine. Specifically, he wanted a chest of medical supplies to treat syphilis, which a significant portion of his crew had apparently contracted in Nassau. The governor of South Carolina, confronted with the most powerful pirate in the Atlantic holding his harbor hostage and demanding pharmacological assistance for his crew's venereal disease, complied. The medicine was delivered. Blackbeard released his hostages, let the ships through, and sailed away. The whole incident is so strange that it almost reads as comic, but look at it from the position of every merchant captain who heard the story afterward. Blackbeard had the leverage to demand almost anything from Charleston: gold, ships, crew members, a political concession, any number of things that would have escalated the situation dramatically. Instead, he asked for medicine, got it, kept his word, and left without destroying anything or killing anyone. The message this sent to the maritime community was precisely calibrated. Blackbeard's word, when he gives it, is good. Make a deal with him, and he honors it. The problem was that the governor of South Carolina was now furious in a way that had consequences. And the British colonial establishment, which had been watching Blackbeard's growing operation with increasing alarm since at least late 1717, had just been publicly humiliated in front of the entire Atlantic world. Something was going to happen in response. The clock, which had been running since the first time Queen Anne's Revenge flew the black flag, was now running faster. About 3 weeks after Charleston, Blackbeard wrecked Queen Anne's Revenge on purpose. That sentence needs a moment, because it is one of the genuinely strange decisions of the Golden Age, and historians are still not entirely sure what to make of it. In late May or early June 1718, Queen Anne's Revenge and another vessel in the fleet ran aground near Beaufort Inlet, North Carolina, in conditions that seemed, to several people present, deliberate rather than accidental. Blackbeard transferred the most valuable plunder onto his personal sloop, the Adventure, took a core group of loyal crew members, and left. Left behind, on a sandbar, with a wrecked flagship and limited supplies, were somewhere between 200 and 300 men who had served under him and who were now very publicly stranded on the Carolina coast, with no ship and no obvious path forward. 200 to 300 men. On a sandbar, abandoned. The charitable interpretation is that Blackbeard understood the political situation was changing and made a calculated decision to downsize his operation before the Royal Navy forced a reckoning. A fleet of 300 pirates operating openly off the American colonial coast was a diplomatic incident at this point. A smaller, nimbler operation might survive longer. Cutting the numbers down was survival strategy. The less charitable interpretation is that he reduced the head count to increase the individual shares of the loot among those he kept. Fewer people splitting the same pile means more for each person remaining. Both things can be true simultaneously, which is usually how these decisions work in real life. What he did next was accept a royal pardon. The British Crown, recognizing that it could not hunt down every pirate operating in the Caribbean and Atlantic simultaneously, had issued a general amnesty. Pirates who surrendered before a specified deadline, swore off piracy, and presented themselves to a colonial governor would have their previous crimes forgiven. This was politically controversial, and many people considered it an insult to the merchants and sailors who had been victimized by years of piracy. But the Crown was pragmatic. Getting pirates off the water cheaply was better than fighting them expensively. Blackbeard took the pardon from Governor Charles Eden of North Carolina, settled in a town called Bath, reportedly married a local woman, and attempted something that must have felt deeply alien to him: a normal life. He was approximately 37 or 38 years old. He had money, he had a house, he had legal standing. He lasted roughly 4 months. By late summer and fall of 1718, he was back at sea, taking ships, working the coastal trade routes again, back under the black flag, with a smaller crew and a lower profile than before, but unmistakably back to the same trade. Why? This is the question that biographers have circled for centuries. The answer that most people land on is that he simply could not stop, that the life at sea, the action, the identity that came with being Blackbeard was too fundamental to who he was. That might be correct. But it probably doesn't tell the full story. Consider the other forces operating on him during those months. Governor Spotswood of Virginia, a neighboring colony and an ambitious, aggressive administrator, was actively building a case against Blackbeard even while he held the pardon. Spotswood suspected that Governor Eden of North Carolina was taking cuts of Blackbeard's plunder in exchange for continued protection. Whether this was true or simply politically useful for Spotswood to believe is unclear. What is clear is that Spotswood saw Blackbeard's continued existence as both a genuine security problem and a personal political opportunity. Spotswood was the kind of man who did not wait for jurisdiction to sort itself out. In November 1718, he secretly organized and funded 2 small Royal Navy sloops, the Jane and the Ranger, and commissioned Lieutenant Robert Maynard to command them. The mission was kept quiet because Spotswood knew that going after a pirate operating in North Carolina waters without coordinating with the North Carolina governor was legally questionable at best and potentially an act of intercolonial aggression at worst. He went ahead anyway. He funded part of the operation personally. That detail tells you how seriously he was taking this. Meanwhile, Blackbeard was anchored at Ocracoke Inlet. He had been in the area for several weeks. Other pirates, including a captain named Charles Vane, had been using Ocracoke as a meeting point. Shallow water, difficult for large naval vessels to navigate, plenty of warning time when ships approached. The night before Maynard arrived, November 21st, 1718, Blackbeard was reportedly hosting a party. Rum, noise, celebration. At some point during that night, someone in the crew asked about the treasure, about where it was kept, in case things went badly. Blackbeard's recorded answer, "Nobody but the devil and himself knew where the treasure was, and the longest liver would take all." That response, delivered at a party the night before a battle he may have known was coming, tells you something important about the man's state of mind. He had been operating in smaller waters for months. He knew Spotswood was hunting him. He had somewhere between 12 and 20 men on adventure. He was anchored in an inlet that limited his ability to maneuver. The conditions for a fight were not favorable. He did not move the ship. November 22nd, 1718. Before sunrise, Maynard brought his 2 sloops into Ocracoke Inlet in darkness, moving carefully through the shallow water. He had stripped both vessels of heavy guns to reduce draft, gave them better maneuverability in the shoals, but considerably less firepower than the ships would otherwise carry. His men were flat on the decks to reduce silhouette. He was operating in waters that Blackbeard had specifically chosen because large naval warships couldn't enter them, and he had brought small ships and prepared them specifically for those conditions. When Blackbeard spotted movement in the dark, escape was already not straightforward. The inlet's geography worked against easy retreat. The shoals that had made the anchorage safe from large warships were now the same shoals that would complicate any fast departure in the wrong direction. At first light, when both sides could see clearly, Maynard's 2 sloops were between Blackbeard's Adventure and open water. Blackbeard had his 18 men. Maynard had over 60 across both vessels. Blackbeard hailed him. The accounts differ slightly on exact wording, but the substance is consistent. He called out to Maynard's ship, asked who they were and what they wanted. Maynard identified himself as Royal Navy. Blackbeard's response, depending on the account, was either to declare he would give no quarter and expected none, or to pour himself a drink and toast to Maynard's health before opening fire, or possibly both in sequence. Then, Adventure fired a broadside. It hit Maynard's 2 ships hard. Ranger, the second sloop, took serious damage from the initial exchange. Its commander was wounded. A significant number of men were casualties. Ranger was effectively knocked out of the fight in the first minutes. Maynard's own ship, Jane, also took hits that produced substantial casualties. Maynard made a decision. He ordered the remaining men below decks. They went down into the hold and waited. On the deck of Jane, from Adventure's perspective, almost nobody was visible. The ship looked like a crippled, nearly crewless vessel that had absorbed a devastating broadside and was essentially finished. Blackbeard saw a nearly empty ship drifting toward him. He ordered his men to prepare to board. This is the exact moment the battle turned, and it turned not on firepower or numbers or positioning. It turned on the fact that Maynard had understood how Blackbeard thought. Maynard had looked at Blackbeard's entire career, the visual theater, the psychological strategy, the consistent exploitation of the gap between what people feared and what was actually in front of them, and had recognized that this strategy worked in both directions. Blackbeard built his entire method around making people see something that wasn't quite real. Maynard made him see something that wasn't quite real. The 2 ships came together. Blackbeard and his men came over the rail onto Jane's deck, and the men Maynard had hidden below came up. The fight lasted somewhere between 10 and 15 minutes. Every account makes it feel longer. Blackbeard was described by multiple witnesses as fighting with total disregard for what was happening to his own body. He took gunshot wounds, the accounts say 5, though the precise number varies, and continued. He had sword cuts across his face and body. He kept moving, kept fighting. There is an account from one of Maynard's sailors claiming that Blackbeard was in the act of cocking a pistol aimed at Maynard himself when he finally went down. His body stopped. The blood loss from wounds that any other man would have stopped fighting through much earlier finally reached a quantity that his body could not compensate for. He collapsed on the deck. The surgeon who examined the body afterward counted 5 bullet wounds and around 20 sword and knife cuts. 5 bullets. 20 blade wounds, still fighting. Maynard cut off the head. Those had been the orders, literal written orders from Governor Spotswood. He hung it from the bowsprit of Jane, the very forward tip of the ship, the first thing any approaching vessel would see, and sailed back toward Virginia. On the way, someone on the crew reportedly threw Blackbeard's body overboard. There is a legend, probably apocryphal, definitely persistent, that the headless body swam around the ship 3 times before sinking. It's almost certainly not true, but it says something about what kind of impression this man left on the people who had just killed him. The question nobody on that ship could answer, the one that hangs over everything, is whether any of it had surprised him the night before. The rum and the party and the comment about the devil and the treasure, the decision not to move the ship when he had time to, the fight itself, which he entered knowing the numbers and fought anyway without apparent intention of surviving. Was this surprise? Or was this a man who had run the calculation and decided that this was the ending he was willing to accept? That question is still open. Here is what the story looks like from the outside. Blackbeard was a pirate. He operated for about 2 years. He was eventually hunted down and killed. Story ends. Here is what the story actually is. During his active career, roughly late 1717 to November 1718, Blackbeard took somewhere between 40 and 50 documented ships. That is a real number. It is also, in the context of the golden age of piracy, not particularly large. Bartholomew Roberts, who was operating during the same era, took over 400 ships. Samuel Bellamy accumulated prizes that dwarfed what Blackbeard ever held. Henry Every executed a single heist in 1695. The looting of the Mughal Emperor's treasure ship Ganj-i-Sawai that produced riches that made Blackbeard's entire career look modest by comparison. By the standard measure of piracy, ships taken, treasure accumulated, operational longevity, Blackbeard was a middling success, maybe even below middling. And yet his name is the one that survived. His face is the one that appears on the flags and the merchandise and the Halloween costumes. His name is the one that comes up first when almost anyone in the world hears the word pirate. Not Roberts, not Bellamy, not Every. Blackbeard, the reason for this is the thing the story is actually about, and it has nothing to do with how many ships he took. He designed the legend deliberately, not as a side effect of his activities, not as an accident of fame. He built the reputation the way you build a tool, with a specific purpose in mind, with deliberate choices about what it would look like and how it would function. The beard, the fuses, the smoke during boarding actions, the ritual of lighting the fuses before he crossed onto another vessel. These were creative decisions made by someone who understood that his primary asset was not his cannons or his crew. It was the thing those cannons and that crew made people believe about him before they ever came close enough to fire. This is why the Charleston blockade was not the impulsive act of a man intoxicated by his own power. It was a brand reinforcement exercise, taking the port of Charleston hostage and then asking for medicine specifically for syphilis, which was the kind of detail that was absolutely going to be in every retelling, was so strange, so specific, so memorable that it traveled up and down the colonial coast for months afterward. Everyone heard it. Everyone repeated it. Everyone who heard it had a slightly different emotional response, but they all remembered who had done it. Blackbeard, the man with the burning beard who blockaded Charleston and asked for syphilis medicine and then kept his word when he got it. You cannot buy that kind of coverage. But the revelation, the thing that actually reframes everything, is not about the performance. It is about why the performance was necessary, and for that, you need to look at the decision he made after the pardon. He took the pardon, he went to Bath, he had the house, the wife, the legitimate standing, and he walked away from it in 4 months. The easy interpretation is inability to change, a man so hardwired for violence and sea life that he couldn't adjust. But look at what he was actually doing in those final months of 1718. He wasn't rebuilding the fleet. He wasn't trying to recapture the operational scale of his peak period. He was running a smaller, quieter operation. He was staying in coastal waters he knew well. He was, according to at least some contemporary accounts, passing intelligence about other pirates to Governor Eden, possibly using the piracy as cover for something more like brokered information trading. This is not a man acting on compulsion. This is a man threading a needle between multiple dangerous forces simultaneously. Eden, Spotswood, the Royal Navy, the merchants who wanted him dead, the remnants of the pirate community he had abandoned on the sandbar at Beaufort. He was managing a complex web of relationships and threats the same way he had always managed them, through the controlled deployment of information and fear and reputation. The needle just finally snapped. Spotswood's operation found him before he found a way to rebalance the situation, and when Maynard arrived at Ocracoke, Blackbeard had 12 to 20 men on a sloop in an inlet, and the 2 paths available to him: fight and almost certainly lose, or run and definitely lose everything he'd spent 2 years building, were both bad. He chose the one that was consistent with everything he had always been. 5 bullets and 20 sword cuts. Still fighting, the treasure was never found. Nobody ever found it. The devil, apparently, collected. Maynard came back to Virginia with the head on the bowsprit and a ship full of wounded men. Governor Spotswood moved fast. The head was displayed publicly, reportedly hung on a pole near the mouth of the Hampton River in Virginia, where ships coming in from sea would see it. The message was intended to be unmistakable. Piracy has consequences. This is what those consequences look like. Bring your ships into Virginia ports with confidence. The captured crew members from Adventure were tried in Williamsburg. The trials were brief. Most were convicted. Most were hanged. A few were acquitted on the grounds that they had been pressed into service against their will, the era's version of a coercion defense. The executions were public. Spotswood wanted the spectacle. The head became famous almost immediately. Sailors and merchants who came through Virginia talked about it. The image of Blackbeard's severed head on the bowsprit of a naval sloop traveled through the coastal port network in exactly the same way Blackbeard's own reputation had traveled. Carried from port to port by sailors who had seen it or heard about it, accumulating detail and drama with each retelling. Spotswood had, intentionally or not, used Blackbeard's own method to announce his death. The golden age of piracy was already winding down by the time of the battle at Ocracoke. Blackbeard's death was one moment in a larger contraction. The Royal Navy was reorganizing specifically to address the Caribbean piracy problem. Colonial governors who had been lax or corrupt were being replaced or pressured. The easy money and protected harbors that had made the Golden Age possible were closing off. Bartholomew Roberts continued operating with considerable success until 1722, when he was killed in a naval engagement off the coast of West Africa. His death is generally considered the effective end of the era. The men Blackbeard had abandoned at Beaufort Inlet in June 1718 scattered in various directions. Some took pardons. Some attempted to continue piracy under other captains and were eventually caught or killed. Some vanished into the colonial economy and lived the rest of their lives without leaving any record. 200 to 300 men, each with a story that went nowhere in the historical record because the people who might have written it down had no particular interest in preserving it. Queen Anne's Revenge sat at the bottom of Beaufort Inlet for 278 years. It was discovered in 1996 by a private research company called Intersol, working under contract with the state of North Carolina. The identification was confirmed through years of careful excavation. The site yielded cannons, anchors, navigational instruments, medical equipment including syringes used to treat syphilis, which, given the nature of the Charleston blockade, has a kind of grim logic to it. Lead shot, ceramic fragments, and thousands of smaller objects that together paint a detailed picture of daily life on an early 18th century pirate vessel. The North Carolina Department of Natural and Cultural Resources now manages the site. Excavations are ongoing as of the time this video was made. The wreck continues to yield material after nearly 30 years of work. No treasure cache has ever been found. The specific plunder from Blackbeard's active years, whatever it amounted to, has never surfaced in any way that connects it reliably to him. Theories about hidden locations have circulated for 3 centuries and produced nothing conclusive. The legend of buried treasure attached to Blackbeard's name is probably exactly that, a legend. Generated by the comment about the devil being the only one who knew where it was, which was the kind of dramatic statement that got embedded in folklore immediately and never quite left. Governor Eden of North Carolina, the man who had given Blackbeard the pardon and whom Spotswood accused of corruption, was never charged with anything. Spotswood's accusations were politically useful, but apparently not legally supportable. Eden died in 1722, still in office, cause of death recorded as fever. The question of whether he was genuinely corrupt or whether Spotswood was simply using him as a political target is one that historians have debated without resolution. Governor Spotswood thrived. His career advanced. He became a wealthy man, a prominent figure in Virginia colonial society, a successful businessman. He lived until 1740. He got exactly what he had wanted from the operation at Ocracoke: credit, political standing, and the effective removal of a problem that had been embarrassing the colonial establishment for 2 years. Lieutenant Maynard received prize money, but was reportedly dissatisfied with the level of recognition he received. He had lost men in the battle, his ships had taken serious damage, and the public credit went largely to the governor, who had stayed in Williamsburg and organized the mission from a comfortable office. This is how institutional reward systems worked in 1718. It is probably how they work in most institutions today. The head on the bowsprit. There is one more thing worth noting about that detail. Maynard hung it there specifically because it would be the first thing visible when the ship came into port, because it would be witnessed by maximum numbers of people, because it would generate stories that would travel the same routes that Blackbeard's own reputation had traveled. To defeat Blackbeard, Maynard did not just beat him in a fight. He understood how Blackbeard had operated, and he used those same tools in the other direction. Reputation as a weapon. Fear as information. The displayed head was a piece of communication, not just a trophy. Blackbeard would have recognized the tactic immediately. Here is the honest thing about Edward Teach that most retellings avoid. By the numbers that usually measure greatness in his field, ships taken, treasure accumulated, years of operation, he was not exceptional. 2 years of active piracy, 40 to 50 prizes, a fleet he deliberately destroyed himself. Bartholomew Roberts did in any 3-month stretch what Blackbeard managed in his entire career. By the standards of the profession he had chosen, Blackbeard was successful but not dominant. What he was dominant at was something the 18th century did not have a word for. We call it brand, or reputation management, or narrative control. The specific skill of understanding that the story about you matters more than the thing you actually did, that if the story is well built enough, it outlives you by centuries without needing maintenance. He was sitting at the bowsprit of Queen Anne's Revenge somewhere in the Atlantic in 1717, braiding hemp cords into his beard and thinking about what it would look like when he lit them during a boarding action. What it would look like from across the water, what the surviving sailors would say in port that night, what that story would do to the next captain who heard it and then saw his ship on the horizon 2 weeks later. He was thinking about the chain of perception and fear and surrender that the image of a demon walking through cannon smoke would set in motion. That is not the thinking of a man who lives in the moment. That is strategic planning. And it worked so completely, built a legacy so durable, that we are still here 300 years later, describing exactly the image he designed. The night before he died, he told his crew the devil would take his share of the treasure, and the longest liver would take all. In the morning, he got on a ship with 18 men to fight 60, and didn't stop fighting until his body physically gave out at 5 bullets and 20 blade wounds. Maybe he had run out of options and was making the best of a bad situation. Maybe he knew the ending was coming and decided to meet it on his own terms. Maybe the most psychologically sophisticated pirate of his era simply reached a point where the performance and the man had become the same thing, and the performance demanded a specific kind of ending. We don't know. The archives don't say. What they say is that the name is still the one that comes up first, that the face is still the one on the flag, that 300 years after Ocracoke Inlet, when someone says pirate, the image that forms in most people's minds has a black beard and fire burning from it. He designed that. In the same way, a writer designs an image they want to stay with you after the book closes, in the same way a filmmaker designs a shot they want you to see when you close your eyes that night. Blackbeard designed the image he wanted the world to carry. And then he made sure that image was attached to enough fear, enough stories, enough genuine menace that it would survive him indefinitely. The difference between wanting to live and wanting to matter, he chose, and the choice held. The head came off at Ocracoke on November 22nd, 1718. The name never did. If you want more of this, the full, unfiltered stories of the people who operated in the golden age of piracy, the decisions they made on wooden ships in the middle of the Atlantic with their lives on the line, subscribe. Every story from this era is this strange. Some of them are stranger. The next one is already being built.